The auctioneer's boot came down on Evelyn Hartley's fingers first. That was the part nobody talked about afterward. Not the rope burns on her wrists, not the way Decker Holt grabbed her chin and turned her face left and right like he was inspecting a horse's teeth. It was the boot, deliberate, slow. He ground his heel into her knuckles while the crowd watched, and he smiled the whole time he did it. The kind of smile that had nothing behind it except the pleasure of the act itself. "Stand up straight," he said. "You're costing me money hunched over like that." She stood up straight. If you've ever watched someone swallow their own scream in public, you know what her face looked like in that moment, like a door closing from the inside. That scene, that boot, that smile, that crowd doing nothing, is where this story begins. Not with the rescue, not with the cowboy, with the boot, and with every person who saw it and looked somewhere else. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to its end, because what happens next will stay with you. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me the city or country where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Red Hollow, Montana Territory, 1877, and find out what happened when one man refused to look somewhere else. The auction platform was built from old barnwood, and it was crooked. 3 planks had warped up at the edges from last spring's flooding, and nobody had bothered to fix them because nobody important enough had ever stood on it before. It was used for livestock, mostly. Mules. The occasional stolen horse sold fast before the previous owner came looking. Evelyn Hartley stood on the crooked platform and felt one edge of a warped plank pressing into the arch of her left foot through the thin sole of her boot, and she focused on that small specific pain the way you focus on a candle flame when the room around it is on fire. Don't think about the crowd. Don't think about Decker Holt's voice. Think about the plank. Think about the pressure under your foot. She had been practicing that kind of thinking for 11 days, which was how long she had been in Decker Holt's possession. She didn't use the word captivity anymore, even in her own head. Captivity implied she was waiting to be freed. What she had been doing for 11 days was surviving each hour as it came, not because she believed something better was waiting, but because she was too stubborn to stop. That stubbornness was the only thing nobody had managed to take from her yet. "Starting bid is $40, Holt announced to the crowd. He was a big man who had run to softness around the middle in his late 40s, but he still carried himself like a man who expected to be obeyed. And in Red Hollow, Montana Territory, in the autumn of 1877, that expectation was almost always met. He wore a brown coat with brass buttons and a hat that had seen better decades, and he spoke with the practiced ease of a man who had done this before. Not just sold things, sold people. Evelyn knew that about him now. She had not known it when she first encountered him on the road outside of Billings, when he and 2 of his men had come across the wreckage of the wagon train and found her alive in the grass with her sister's blood still drying on her hands. She had thought for approximately 4 minutes that they were there to help. 4 minutes was how long it took Holt to assess the situation and make his calculation. $40, someone in the crowd called back. The voice was lazy, bored, like this was nothing, because to them, it was nothing. That was the thing Evelyn had been trying to understand for 11 days and still could not fully absorb. To the men in the crowd, she was a transaction, a line in a ledger, the same casual commerce that bought grain and sold timber and traded horses. She kept her eyes fixed on the mountain line visible over the rooftops at the far end of the street. Blue-gray peaks, snow on them already, impossibly permanent against the pale autumn sky. Mountains didn't care what happened in Red Hollow. They'd been there before the town, and they'd be there after. She found that comforting in a way she couldn't have explained. "50, said another voice, closer. She didn't look. "Gentleman's making a statement," Holt said, and there was laughter. Evelyn's hands were tied in front of her, not behind. Holt wasn't careless enough to make that mistake. Not after she'd gotten her hands free on the 3rd night and damn near taken out one of his men's kneecap with a tent spike before they got her back under control. In front, wrists crossed, with about 6 inches of movement in either direction. She had measured the range every day since. 6 inches wasn't enough. She thought about her sister. She made herself stop. She thought about the mountains. 60, said the first voice. And now there was an edge of something competitive in it, and she heard the shift in the crowd, the low murmur of entertainment at the prospect of a bidding war. She was entertainment. The realization came to her not as shock, she was past shock, but as a kind of cold, clarifying anger that settled in her chest like a stone. She'd had good moments with anger in the past 11 days. Anger was cleaner than despair. Despair made you passive. Anger, if you were careful with it, could keep you thinking. She was thinking very hard when she heard the crowd go quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a pause in conversation. The particular quiet that happens when something enters a space that changes the room's understanding of itself. She looked. She almost didn't see him at first because he wasn't moving. He was just standing at the back edge of the crowd, and he was still in the way that very few people are truly still. Not restless still, not patient still, but the kind of absolute physical stillness that comes from a man who learned long ago that movement attracts attention, and attention, in his line of living, had often meant someone trying to kill him. He was tall, lean in a way that suggested not hunger but the particular discipline of a body kept functional rather than comfortable. Dark coat, road dust on it, hat pulled low. She couldn't see his face clearly from the platform, but she could see the crowd's reaction to him, and what she saw was something she hadn't witnessed once in 11 days. The crowd gave him room, not rudely, not obviously, but the way water gives room to something dropped into it, a natural redistribution around a new center of gravity. "You 70, said the voice that had been bidding at 60, and there was less confidence in it now, and she understood why when she traced the direction of the speaker's eyes and found them fixed on the man at the back of the crowd. $70, Holt announced. We have 70. Who'll say 80? 500. The number landed in the crowd's quiet like a stone through ice. Holt stopped mid-sentence. He had been doing this for 15 years in 6 different territories, and nobody had ever made him stop mid-sentence. He looked at the man at the back of the crowd and said with careful neutrality, "I'm sorry? You heard me." The voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. The crowd had parted in the seconds since he spoke, creating a corridor of empty air between the man and the platform, as if no one wanted to stand in the direct line between those 2 points. Evelyn stared at him. His face, now that the crowd had moved, was visible from the platform. Older than she expected from the posture, late 30s maybe, with the particular weathering of a face that had spent years in wind and sun and had stopped caring about the effect. A jaw that was currently holding something in, a muscle there moving once and stopping. Eyes that were doing a very thorough job of looking at everything in the space around the platform without looking directly at Holt or at her, which she would later understand was not disinterest but situational awareness. He was taking inventory of the exits, the armed men, the distances. $500, Holt said, and now his voice had changed. Less performance, more transaction. He was doing math. That's a serious number. I'm a serious man. You're Cole Maverick, said someone in the crowd, and the name moved through the assembled people the way certain names move. A ripple of recognition, of recalibration, of a collective reassessment of what the afternoon might contain. She had never heard the name before. She watched what it did to the crowd and filed the information. Holt was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. He looked at Cole Maverick. He looked at his own men, 3 of them, stationed at strategic points that had felt strategic an hour ago and perhaps felt less so now. He looked back at the man in the dark coat. 500 is an interesting number for a woman with no proven skills and a history of, "I wasn't negotiating," Cole Maverick said. "I was telling you the number I was going to pay." Another silence. Then Holt smiled, the specific smile of a man deciding that $500 and being alive was better than a principle. "Sold," he said. And that was the moment Evelyn Hartley hated most about the entire transaction, the fact that she felt relief. That she stood there on that crooked plank with her hands bound and her fingers aching, and she felt relief that a stranger had paid money for her, which meant the auction was done, which meant nobody else had won. She despised the relief. She let herself feel it anyway. 2 of Holt's men came to the side of the platform. She climbed down before they could touch her, which was a small and deliberate act of refusal that she suspected nobody noticed. She was wrong about that. Cole Maverick noticed. She would learn later that he noticed most things. He was standing 8 feet from her when she stepped off the platform. Up close, she could see the coat was not just dusty, but had been repaired at the left shoulder, a careful repair done by someone who knew what they were doing. She noticed details like that now, habit from 11 days of gathering every fragment of information that might become useful. He looked at her directly for the first time. "Evelyn Hartley," Holt said from somewhere behind her, with the cheerful briskness of a man completing paperwork. "Age 22. Originally from—" "I didn't ask," Cole said, still looking at her. "Came west with a wagon party out of—" "I didn't ask you," Cole said, and the repetition was quiet and final, and Holt stopped talking. She waited for Cole to say something. He didn't. He reached into his coat and produced a folding knife, and her body went rigid before she could stop it. A reflex, something trained into her by 11 days of learning that sudden movements near her usually had bad endings. He saw the flinch. Something shifted in his expression, a brief compression around the eyes. "For the rope," he said. He held the knife still, blade closed, and waited. She made herself breathe. She held out her wrists. He opened the knife and cut the rope in 2 quick practice strokes, and the pressure on her wrists released, and she almost made a sound. She didn't. She pressed her lips together and held it in. "You need a place to stay," he said. It was not a question. It was the assessment of a man who was looking at someone who had been sleeping on the ground for 11 days, who had no coat despite the October cold, who was holding her cut wrists against her chest because the returning circulation burned. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't have any reason to trust you." "No," he said again, with the same even tone, like he was acknowledging a fact about the weather. "Then why would I go anywhere with you?" He was quiet for a moment. Behind him, the crowd had begun to disperse, the entertainment concluded, the town returning to its ordinary purposes. Holt's men had already gone to collect the payment. Holt himself was watching from a distance with an expression she couldn't read. "You wouldn't," Cole said finally. "Not because you trust me. You'd go because you have nowhere else to go and because you're smart enough to know that standing in this street at nightfall is worse than coming with a stranger who paid $500 to end an auction." She looked at him, really looked, not the quick, comprehensive survival scan she'd been doing of everyone around her for 11 days, but actually looked at his face, looking for the thing behind the thing. "You could have just bought something else," she said, "some actual property. For $500 you could have bought—" "I know what $500 buys," he said. She waited. He said nothing else. He didn't explain himself, didn't offer reassurances, didn't give her the speech she'd been half expecting about charity or kindness or whatever story he'd constructed for himself about why he'd done what he'd just done. That silence, more than anything, made her decide. Not because she trusted him. She wasn't capable of trust right now. But because a man with bad intentions almost always explained himself, almost always had the speech ready. Silence, in her current inventory of experience, was rarer and more valuable than comfort. "My horse needs water," she said. "I don't have a horse," she added immediately, because the words had come out wrong, a reflex from a previous life. "I used to have a horse." Something changed in his face. Not pity. She would have turned and walked directly into the Montana wilderness rather than accept pity. Something more restrained than that. Recognition, maybe. The look of a person who understood specifically what it felt like to refer to something in the present tense that no longer existed. "I have horses," he said. "You can ride." It wasn't a question, but she answered it. "Yes," she said. He turned and started walking, and she followed him. And the people of Red Hollow watched them go, and not one of them said a word, and the auction platform stood empty against the October sky. They rode out of town without speaking. She had been given a bay mare that was calm and well-fed and clearly better cared for than most things in Red Hollow, and she held the reins and felt the familiar weight of a horse under her and concentrated on that, on the weight and warmth and rhythm, because if she let herself think about anything else right now, she wasn't sure what would happen. He rode beside her. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. About 2 miles out of town, when the sound of Red Hollow had fully faded, and the road had become a trail winding between stands of yellowing aspen, she said, "Why?" Not a full question, just the word. He rode another 50 feet before he answered. "My mother was sold," he said. "She was 16. I found out when I was 32, and it was too late to do anything about it except carry it. She didn't say anything. I saw you on that platform," he said, "and I thought about what she must have looked like, standing there, with people deciding." He paused. "I wasn't going to walk past that." The aspens moved in the wind above them. A hawk crossed the sky to the south, going somewhere with purpose. "I'm not her," Evelyn said, because she needed to say it, needed him to understand that she was not a symbol, not a second chance at something he'd lost, not a placeholder for a grief he couldn't resolve. "I know that," he said without hesitation, and she believed him. They rode for a while longer in a quiet that was not comfortable but was honest, which was the only kind of quiet she had any use for. The ranch appeared at the end of the valley as the light was going flat and orange at the horizon. A main house, a barn, 2 outbuildings, fence lines running out in multiple directions, a water tank that caught the last of the day's color and held it briefly before the sky changed. It was not beautiful in any decorative sense. It was functional. Built for use, for survival, for the work of keeping a piece of this land alive and productive in conditions that were mostly indifferent to whether it succeeded. She found it absurdly more reassuring than anything beautiful would have been. There were 2 men at the barn when they rode in, ranch hands who looked up at her with curiosity. They were careful not to show because something about Cole Maverick's posture communicated clearly that questions would not be welcome tonight. She dismounted. Her legs were shakier than she expected. 11 days of not enough food, not enough sleep, and today's particular sequence of events had taken a toll she hadn't fully accounted for while she was busy surviving them. She grabbed the saddle horn. Steadied. Cole was off his horse and standing nearby before she realized he'd moved. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer a hand, just stood at a distance that would have let him catch her if she fell and was otherwise very busy looking at something in the middle distance. She appreciated that more than she could say. "There's a room," he said, still looking at the middle distance. "Off the back of the main house. Door has a lock, keys on the inside." "You're telling me I can lock the door?" "I'm telling you the door has a lock," he said. "Do what you want with that information." She let go of the saddle horn. She stood on her own feet. "I'll need clothes," she said, "and food, and something for my wrists. Kitchen's through the back. Nell, the woman who keeps house. She'll have what you need. I'll find you something to wear for tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." She nodded once. She walked toward the house, and she didn't look back, and she didn't let her legs shake until she was through the door and the door was closed behind her. The room off the back of the main house was small and low-ceilinged and smelled of pine wood and dust and something that might have been dried sage. There was a bed with a wool blanket. There was a washstand with a pitcher on it. There was a window that faced east. She sat on the edge of the bed. She had not sat on a bed in 11 days. She put her face in her hands, and she did not cry. She wasn't ready to cry. She didn't know when she would be. But she sat there in the quiet room with the door locked behind her, and she felt for the first time in 11 days something that was not quite safe, but was the first rough shape of it. Outside, through the wall, she could hear Cole Maverick giving instructions to his men. His voice was level, steady, carrying the specific authority of someone who did not need to raise it. She listened to it the way she had listened to the weight of the horse under her, something real to anchor to. She lay down on the bed without taking off her boots. She intended to stay awake, to keep watch. Old habit from 11 days that hadn't become a habit so much as a condition. She was asleep in less than 4 minutes. She woke up still in her boots, which she hadn't done since she was a child, sleeping through a thunderstorm in her father's house in Ohio. The room was gray with early light. She lay still for a moment, taking inventory the way she'd learned to do, listening before moving, cataloging what was around her before deciding what to do about any of it. Old barn smell, pine, sage, wool blanket, the sound of someone moving in the kitchen on the other side of the wall, the distant sound of cattle, not Holt's camp, not the cold ground, not the rope. She sat up and looked at her wrists. The marks were ugly. Red-purple bruising, the skin abraded in two neat bands where the rope had been. She'd wrapped them last night with strips from a cloth Nell had left with the water pitcher. An older woman with gray-streaked hair who had asked no questions and handed over food and clean cloth with the specific efficiency of someone who understood that questions could wait and hunger and wounds could not. Evelyn unwrapped the cloth now, examined the damage, rewrapped it tighter. She pulled her boots off, then pulled them back on. She wasn't ready to be without them. Maybe tomorrow. The kitchen was empty when she pushed through the door, but there was coffee on the iron stove and a plate covered with a cloth on the table. She stood in the middle of the kitchen for a moment, aware that she was in another person's house, that she had no claim here, that the ordinary gestures of hospitality, the coffee, the covered plate, were more disorienting than she'd expected. She had been somebody's property for 11 days. Being somebody's guest required a completely different set of operating instructions, and she wasn't sure she remembered how. She poured coffee. She sat down. She ate what was under the cloth, which was bread and salt pork and 2 boiled eggs, and she ate all of it without tasting much of it because her body was doing arithmetic she couldn't override. She was finishing the coffee when she heard boots on the porch, and Cole Maverick came through the door. He stopped when he saw her. Not in surprise. She suspected he didn't do much in surprise, but in the brief recalibration of a man who had expected the kitchen to be empty. "You're up," he said. "You're observant," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and something at the corner of his mouth moved that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter and looked out the window at whatever was happening in the yard. "Sleep any?" he asked. "Some." "Nell can find you more clothes today. What you're wearing." He stopped. "Isn't mine," she finished. "I know." The dress she had on was one Nell had produced last night from somewhere, plain brown wool that was too large through the shoulders. Her own dress had been beyond salvaging. "I'll pay you back for everything when I can." "You don't need to." "I'm going to anyway," she said, and the flatness in her voice was not rudeness, but the sound of a boundary being placed, carefully but firmly, because she had learned in the last 11 days what happened when you let people believe they owned your debt. He nodded once. He understood boundaries. She could see that about him already. The way he took up exactly the space he needed and no more. The way he listened more than he spoke. The way he did not push against the edges of whatever invisible lines were drawn. "I need to know what you want from me," she said, "in exchange for the $500, and the room, and the food." He turned from the window and looked at her directly. "Nothing," he said. "That's not an answer that exists in the world I've been living in." "Maybe you've been living in the wrong part of the world." Cole. It was the first time she'd used his name, and they both registered it. "I am a practical person. I need to understand the arrangement. If there's work you need done, can you cook? Better than most. Can you ride? I told you I could. Can you keep accounts? The man who was doing the books for the ranch left last month, and I've been doing it myself, and I'm bad at it." She looked at him. "Bookkeeping. I can pay you a wage, small, same as I pay Nell." He paused. "It's not charity. I need the work done, and you need somewhere to be. That's a transaction I understand." She was quiet, turning that over. It was practical, honest. It did not involve him owning her obligation. "I'll need to see what kind of mess the books are in first," she said. "They're a complete disaster," he said, with a directness that surprised a short exhale out of her. "All right," she said. "I'll look at them today." He set down his coffee cup, picked up his hat from the hook by the door. "Ranch hands are Dub and Perkins. Dub's the one with the beard. Perkins will talk your ear off if you give him the opportunity, just so you know." "What about Nell?" "Nell's been here longer than I have. She'll tell you anything you actually need to know about this place, and a fair amount you didn't ask for." He put on his hat. "Stay close to the buildings today, not because I'm telling you to, because the country out there—" He tilted his head toward the mountains visible through the window. "It's not forgiving of people who don't know it yet. I've been managing unfamiliar country." "You've been surviving it," he said. "That's not the same thing." He went out the door. She sat with her coffee and thought about the distinction. She decided he was right, which annoyed her, and she filed it. The books were, as advertised, a disaster. She found them in a wooden box in the main room, a collection of ledgers with entries in at least 3 different handwriting styles, numbers that didn't reconcile, months with no entries at all, and a system of notation that appeared to have been invented by someone who had a different relationship to mathematics than was generally recommended. She sat with them for 2 hours at the kitchen table while the ranch moved around her outside, and by the end of it she had a reasonable picture of Cole Maverick's financial situation, which was more stable than the book suggested, which meant the previous bookkeeper had been either incompetent or skimming, and given that he had left unexpectedly, she had a working theory about which. She was on her 3rd review when Nell came in from outside with a basket of something and stopped at the sight of Evelyn surrounded by ledgers with a piece of charcoal in her hand and numbers written on the back of a flour sack. "Lord," Nell said, and then caught herself and said, "You look like you found what you were looking for." "Someone was stealing from him," Evelyn said. Nell set down the basket. She looked at the flour sack. She looked at Evelyn. "Harlan," she said. "I don't know who that is." "Man who kept the books. Left last month. Bought himself a new horse on the way out of town." Nell sat down across from her. "I told Cole. He said he'd look into it." "He hasn't looked into it. Cole doesn't like paperwork." "He's going to like being robbed less." Nell smiled. "A real one, not the polite kind." "You been here one morning." "I can count," Evelyn said. They looked at each other across the ledgers, and something settled between them, not friendship yet, which took longer, but the preliminary agreement that 2 practical women in a difficult situation could make toward each other without much discussion. "How much?" Nell asked, nodding at the books. "Over 2 years, somewhere between $80 and $120. Hard to be exact with the records in this state." Nell was quiet. Then, "He's not going to go after Harlan." "I know. It's not weakness. He just—" She stopped, started again. "Cole picked those battles a long time ago. Which ones are worth the blood and which ones you let go?" Evelyn looked back at the ledger. "I'm not asking him to go after anyone. I'm just going to make sure it doesn't happen again." She went back to the numbers. Nell watched her for a moment. Then she got up and started on whatever she'd come in to do, and neither of them said anything else. And it was easy between them in a way that Evelyn hadn't known with another person in long enough that she noticed the ease and was briefly, fiercely grateful for it. She met Dub and Perkins at midday when she brought out coffee to the barn where they were repairing a section of fence rail. Dub was exactly as described, bearded, spare with words, gave her a nod that communicated respect and the intention to mind his own business. Perkins was younger, mid-20s, with an open face that hadn't learned yet to hide what it was thinking. "You're the woman from the auction," Perkins said, and Dub's elbow found his ribs about a quarter second too late. "I am," Evelyn said. "I didn't mean—" Perkins started. "You meant exactly what you said, and it's accurate," she said. "Here's your coffee." Perkins took the coffee with the chastened look of a man who had been corrected and knew he deserved it. Dub took his with a nod that had, she thought, a degree of approval in it. "You know anything about cattle?" Perkins asked, apparently constitutionally unable to let a silence stand. "Some. My family had a small farm. Cole's got about 200 head in the north pasture. Been having trouble with a section of fence up there. Cattle keep getting through to the riverbank. Dub thinks it's a soft spot in the ground shifting the posts." "Perkins," Dub said. "What?" "She's keeping the books. She should know about the fence situation." "She doesn't need to know about the fence situation over coffee she just brought out." Evelyn looked at Dub. "Is the fence situation going to show up in the accounts?" "Probably," Dub said. "Then I need to know about it." Perkins looked at Dub with the expression of a man who has been proven right. Dub did not acknowledge this. She spent the afternoon finishing her reconciliation of the accounts, and she had a clean version of the figures ready by the time Cole came in at dusk. He sat down across from her, looked at what she'd done, and was quiet for a long moment. "Harlan took about $100 over 2 years," she said. "Give or take, the records are too inconsistent to be more precise. You're solvent, more than I would have expected from the state of these books. You've got a fence problem up north that's probably going to cost you $40 to fix properly. You underpaid your supply account in billings by $6 last spring, which they haven't billed you for yet, but they will. He was still looking at the papers. How long did this take you? Today. He looked up at her. I'm good at numbers, she said. Not boasting, reporting. I can see that. He picked up the flour sack with her working figures on it and examined it. $6 in billings. 63rd entry from last spring. Harlan entered 44 where it should have been 50. Might have been a mistake. Given the pattern, I doubt it. Cole set the paper down. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture that was the first unconsciously human thing she'd seen him do, and it made him briefly more real to her than the morning's careful practicality had. Harlan's in Billings, he said. Has a cousin there. I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I know. He was quiet. Thank you for this. She nodded. She started stacking the ledgers. You said you had family, he said. On the wagon train. She stopped stacking. You don't have to, he started. My sister, she said. Clara. She was 19. She kept her hands on the ledgers. There was a fever that took 3 people in the first 2 weeks. Then the wagon broke down crossing a creek bed and we lost 2 days. Then the men who attacked the train. She said this all very evenly, the tone of someone who has rehearsed the facts in order to survive them. Clara was the only family I had left. She'd been sick since the fever. She wasn't strong enough. I'm sorry, Cole said. Don't. She stopped, steadied. Don't do the thing where you say something and I'm supposed to feel better. I know you mean well. She pressed her lips together. I'm not ready for it to mean something yet. He nodded. He didn't push. They sat in silence for a while, the ranch settling into evening around them, and it was not comfortable silence, but it was not dishonest silence, and she was learning that there was a difference. Your mother, she said eventually. He looked at the table. You don't have to, she said, returning his own words. She was from a settlement down in the territories. She was 16 when she was taken. My grandfather, her father, spent 12 years looking for her. He paused. He found her when I was 4. She was alive. She had me by then. But she wasn't... He stopped. She never talked about what happened to her. I didn't know the whole of it until I was in my 30s and found her letters after she passed. Evelyn looked at him. She spent her whole life building walls, he said. She was kind. She was capable. She could never fully let the walls down, not even with me. You think you could have done something differently? Evelyn said. Not a question. She could hear it in the way he'd told it. The specific tone of a person reviewing a story they can't change, looking for the moment they could have altered. I was her son, he said. I should have. There's nothing you should have done, she said, with more heat than she intended. Whatever she couldn't let down was not your responsibility to dismantle. That's not how it works. He looked at her. I'm speaking from current events, she said, more quietly. He nodded. They sat with that. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. The rhythm of the ranch was nothing like the life she'd had in Ohio, which had been small and domestic and ordered in ways she hadn't understood were luxuries until she'd left them behind. Here, everything was physical and immediate, and had consequences if you did it wrong. A gate left unlatched meant cattle in the wrong pasture. A fire in the stove not banked properly meant freezing through the night. The relationship between action and result was brutally direct, and she found, unexpectedly, that she preferred it. She kept the books. She cooked with Nell, not taking over, but contributing, learning the rhythms of the kitchen by watching what needed doing and doing it, which was how she'd learned most things in her life. She rode out twice with Cole to look at the fence problem in the north pasture, and she understood within 10 minutes of seeing it that Dub's assessment was correct, and she helped move the stakes herself until her shoulders ached in ways that felt oddly satisfying. She slept with the door locked every night. Cole never mentioned it. Perkins showed her how to operate the Winchester rifle that hung above the kitchen door, because Nell had told him to, and Perkins was too afraid of Nell to argue about it. She already knew the basics. Her father had made sure of that at least. But she paid attention anyway, because knowing a thing and knowing it in a specific place with a specific weapon were different. You've done this before, Perkins said, watching her work the lever action. Some. You're not scared of it. I'm not scared of the rifle, she said. He seemed to understand the distinction. On the 8th night, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp and the account books when she heard Cole come in late, later than usual, and something in the sound of his boots on the porch floor was different. She put down her pen. He came through the door, and he had a cut above his left eye that was still bleeding slowly, and he had the very specific expression of a man who is managing pain and would prefer not to discuss it. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing." "Cole." He sat down in the chair across from her and looked at the table, and she could see him making the calculation of whether to lie and concluding that she would not accept a lie, and being, she suspected, mildly unsettled by that. "2 men outside Red Hollow," he said. "They followed me out from town." She was very still. "Holt's men." "One of them, yes." "What did they want?" He looked at her, and the look told her what they wanted without him having to say it, and she held that information in her chest for a moment, the full weight of it. "The other one," she said, "works for a man named Garrett Cruz, runs most of the business that Holt doesn't." "I don't know that name." "You don't need to know it yet," he said, and the "yet" was a small word that meant a lot more than its size suggested. She got up and found the cloth and the liniment Nell kept in the cupboard above the stove, and she brought them back to the table, and she sat down, and without asking permission, she started cleaning the cut above his eye, because if she waited for him to do it himself, the infection risk was real, and she was not interested in managing an infected man on top of everything else. He sat very still while she worked. She could feel the tension in him. Not against her, but the tension of a man who was not accustomed to being touched with something other than violence in mind. "How bad was it?" she said. "I've had worse." "That's not reassuring." "Wasn't meant to be." She blotted the cut. He winced once, a small, controlled sound. "They know I'm here," she said. "They knew before tonight." She stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "How long?" "Since the second day." "And you didn't tell me." "I was handling it." She put the cloth down. "Cole." She waited until he was looking at her. "I am not someone you protect by not telling. That is not how I work. You tell me things. We handle them together. That is the arrangement, or there is no arrangement." He held her gaze. There was something working in his face. The collision of 2 operating principles, she thought. One that said, protect people by managing what they know, and one that was only now registering that she was not the kind of person that principle was designed for. "All right," he said. "All right, meaning you'll tell me things." "Yes." "Starting with what Garrett Cruz actually wants, and why Holt is involved, and what you think is going to happen next." He was quiet for a moment. "Cruz runs an operation, moving people, mostly. Women, some men. Holt is one of his supply sources. What I did at the auction was not just the $500. It was a disruption to an arrangement." She absorbed this. "They're not just going to let it go," he said. "No," she agreed. "There are going to be more men." "Probably." "Evelyn." He said her name with a weight that meant he was about to say something he'd been holding. "I didn't fully understand what I was walking into when I made that bid. I knew some of it, not all of it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Neither did I," she said. "When I left Ohio." She picked the cloth back up and finished cleaning the cut. "We're both here now." He let her finish. She applied the liniment, and he hissed through his teeth and then was quiet. "How many men does Cruz have?" she said. "More than I do." "Do you have friends in this territory? Anyone who—" "Not many." "Then we need a different approach." "We," he said. "I told you," she said, setting down the cloth and looking at him directly. "That's the arrangement." He looked at her for a long time in the lamplight, and she could see him doing the thing he did. The quiet, comprehensive assessment, the honest evaluation of what was in front of him. "You were a bookkeeper," he said. "I'm many things," she said. "All right," he said again, and this time it meant something more than agreement. It meant a door opening in the particular wall that a man builds around the part of himself that has survived a great deal and is therefore very careful about who it lets stand beside it. She nodded once. She blew out the lamp. Outside, the Montana night pressed cold and enormous against the walls of the ranch house, and somewhere out in it, men were making plans that involved the 2 people sitting in the dark kitchen, and neither of them were running. And that was either courage or stubbornness or the particular variety of determination that lives somewhere between the two and doesn't care much what you call it. She started mapping the ranch the next morning. Not with paper, not at first. She walked it. She had been on the property for 8 days, but had only moved between the house, the barn, and the north pasture fence line, always with purpose, always with the tunnel vision of someone managing immediate tasks. Now she walked without a task, and she looked at everything differently. The main house sat in the low center of the valley with a creek running 50 yards to the east. The barn and outbuildings were clustered to the north, and the only road in came from the south, following the creek bed before bending west toward the house. On the north and east, the land rose sharply into rocky hillside and then timber. On the west, the valley opened wider before closing again at a narrow cut between two ridgelines about a quarter-mile out. She stood at the western edge of the yard and looked at that cut for a long time. Cole found her there an hour later. "You're measuring something," he said. "How many ways in are there?" He stood beside her and looked at the cut. Road from the south, that gap to the west, timber on the north, but it's rough country, and you'd have to know it. Creek bed from the east if you're on foot and know where it shallows. So 4 approaches. Effectively. Can you cover 4? With Dub and Perkins and me? We can watch them. Covering them's different. She turned and looked back at the house, then at the barn, then at the hillside to the north, where the timber started. She was running numbers in her head, but not the kind that went in ledgers. "What did you do?" she said. "Before this?" "Before the ranch." He was quiet a beat too long. "Soldier," she said. "You told me that." "After the army I worked, enforcement mostly, tracking men who didn't want to be found. Bounty work. Some. Then you know how men like Cruz plan an approach." He looked at her. "Yes." "Tell me." He was quiet again, but this time it wasn't reluctance. He was thinking, actually thinking, the way you do when someone asks a question you've been working in the back of your mind already and now have to bring forward into words. "They won't come in winter," he said. "Too risky in the snow. If they're coming before the first hard freeze, it's in the next 2-3 weeks. He looked at the sky, which had the particular flat gray quality of October preparing to mean business. "They won't come down the road, too exposed. They like the feeling of coming in from multiple directions at once. Makes people not know where to aim. So the gap to the west and the timber to the north. Probably the creek too. Split force, 3 directions. How many men?" "Cruz runs about 15 in this part of the territory. He won't send all of them. Sending all of them means whatever else he's running goes unprotected. He'll send enough to feel overwhelming." He paused. 8, maybe 10. She thought about that. "All right," she said. She went back inside and found paper and drew the ranch from memory, which she could do accurately because she had the kind of spatial memory that her father had called a gift, and her teachers had called unusual, and which she'd mostly thought of as just the way a mind worked until she'd encountered people for whom it didn't. She drew the house and the barn and the creek and the road and the gap and the timber line, and she sat with that drawing for the rest of the morning. At noon, she brought Cole and Dub and Perkins into the kitchen and put the drawing on the table. Perkins said, "That's the ranch." Dub looked at it for a long time without speaking, and then he looked at Cole, and Cole nodded. "Talk," Cole said to her. She pointed to the western gap. "This is where they'll push hardest, because it's the widest approach, and it looks like the obvious way to split our attention. I think that's a feint." She moved her finger to the timberline on the north. "This is where they'll actually put their numbers. The creek approach from the east is probably 2 men at most, enough to make us think we're surrounded." Dub made a sound that was not quite a word. "You disagree?" she said. "No," Dub said. It was, she was learning, a compliment of the highest order from him. "We can't outfight 8 to 10 men with 4 people," she said, "so we can't fight them that way." "What way can we fight them?" Perkins asked. "We don't let them set the terms." She tapped the drawing. "We pick one of these approaches and we close it, completely. They think they have 3 ways in. We make it 2. Then we make one of those 2 very unpleasant." She explained the rest of it. When she was done, Dub looked at the drawing for another long moment and then looked at Cole. "She's been here 9 days, he said, with an inflection that was something between a statement and a question. 8, Evelyn said. It's a good plan, Cole said. It's not a plan yet, she said. It's a shape. The plan is the work we do in the next 2 weeks. They worked. The gap to the west took 3 days. Cole and Dub hauled timber from the north hillside and they worked a fence across the narrowest point of the gap. Not the visible front of it, but 60 yards back, where a second line of rock made a natural brace. It wasn't a fence that would stop determined men. It wasn't meant to. It was a fence that would slow them and redirect them and, more importantly, funnel them toward the specific piece of ground she wanted them on. The creek bed required a different approach. She spent an afternoon with Perkins moving rocks, not dramatically, just enough to shift where the natural shallow crossing sat, redirecting the easiest ford 20 yards north of where it had been. Perkins worked without complaining, though she caught him looking at her with the expression of a man revising his opinion of something in real time. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Perkins. I was just... He stopped, started again. The men in town. They think Cole bought himself. I know what they think, she said. It's not right. No, she agreed. It's not. She hefted another rock. Move that one there. Not there. There. He moved it. The hardest part was the timberline to the north. That was where they expected the main force to come from, and she didn't want to fence it or alter it, because altering it would tell anyone scouting the approach that they'd anticipated it. She wanted it to look exactly as it always had. She just wanted it to be different in ways you couldn't see until you were already in it. Cole spent 4 days up in that timber with Dub, and she did not follow because it was their ground, and she knew when to let people work in their element without her looking over their shoulder. She kept the house and the accounts, and cooked and watched the road, and she thought. On the 12th day, Nell found her on the porch at dawn, standing with coffee and looking south down the road toward Red Hollow. You think they're coming soon, Nell said. Not a question. Cole thinks 2 weeks. I think sooner. Why? Because I've been counting the riders going past on the south road. 4 in the last 3 days. Nobody uses that road in October without purpose. Nell sat down on the porch step and wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. She was quiet for a moment. I've been on this ranch 11 years, she said. Before that, I was in 3 other places that didn't work out. Evelyn looked at her. I'm not leaving, Nell said. I wasn't going to suggest it. Some people would. You know this ground better than anyone except Cole and Dub. You know the creek, the timber, the road. Leaving doesn't make sense. Nell looked up at her. That's the most practical statement of loyalty I've ever heard. It's not loyalty, Evelyn said. It's geography. Nell made a sound that was definitely a laugh, the first real one she'd heard from her, and it changed the morning slightly. She told Cole that night what she'd observed about the riders. He took it in silence. Then, I'll send Perkins out tomorrow to scout the road south. Send him as a supply run. Give him a list. Don't make it obvious. He looked at her. If they're watching the ranch, and they are. A man riding out armed to the south looks like reconnaissance. A man riding out with a list for the general store in Millhaven looks like routine. Perkins is a terrible liar, Cole said. He doesn't need to lie. He just needs to go to the store and come back and tell me what he saw. Cole was quiet for a moment. You think about all of it, don't you? What do you mean? Not just the problem in front of you, the problem around the problem. She looked at the table. My father used to say he was a man who had a lot of problems he couldn't solve. He used to say that most people look at a fire and think about the fire. You have to think about where the fire wants to go next. Cole was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, something open in it, an unguarded quality. Your father sounds like he was a smart man, Cole said. He was, she said. He was also stubborn and wrong about several things, and he died before I could tell him either. She said this without bitterness. The bitterness had been there once and had worn down to something more like complicated love. Most people are like that, though, smart and wrong and gone before you finish the conversation. They sat in the kitchen quiet. The lamp burned. Outside, the wind was coming off the mountains, and the temperature had dropped another notch, and somewhere out there men were planning. Perkins came back from Millhaven the next afternoon with flour and salt and coffee and an account of 3 men he'd seen at the livery stable in town who didn't belong there and weren't buying anything. What'd they look like? Cole asked. Trail riders, hard ones, the kind that don't look at you if you walk past. They look at anything. Perkins was quiet a moment. South Road. Kept looking at the South Road. Cole nodded. How close? Evelyn asked. 4 or 5 days, Cole said. Maybe less if they've already done their scouting. She had been waiting for that number, and now that she had it, she felt the same cold settling in her chest that she'd felt on the auction platform, the same refusal to let it become panic. Panic was expensive. Panic made you do the obvious thing, and the obvious thing was usually what the other side was counting on. Then we finish tomorrow, she said. Whatever isn't done tomorrow doesn't get done. The northern timber line is done, Cole said. The creek fence? Perkins? Done, Perkins said. The signal system? Nell has it, Dub said. She nodded. The signal system was simple. A triangle of small mirrors placed on the roof of the barn and 2 outbuildings, arranged so that a reflection from any approach direction would be visible from the main house's east window. She had spent an afternoon with Nell calibrating the angles and testing them. It was not sophisticated. It was reliable, which was better. 2 days later, at first light, the east window caught a flash. She was already awake. She'd been sleeping in shorter intervals as the days narrowed, waking at every sound, which was not ideal, but was what her nervous system was doing, and arguing with it was a waste of energy. She saw the flash, and she dressed in 30 seconds flat, and she went to Cole's door and knocked twice. His voice came immediately. He'd been awake too. East mirror, she said through the door. Creek approach. Yes, and the West Gap mirror flashed twice while I was watching. 2 directions. A pause. Then the sound of him moving. She went to the kitchen and got the Winchester down from above the door, and she checked it the way Perkins had shown her, though she'd already checked it twice last night and once before bed. She checked it again. The repetition was not anxiety. It was the discipline of a person who understood that small failures produced large consequences. Nell appeared from her room off the kitchen, already dressed, already holding the older shotgun that lived under her bed, and that she had apparently not mentioned to anyone as a matter of course. You have a shotgun, Evelyn said. I have had a shotgun for 11 years, Nell said. Nobody asked. Cole came through in his coat with his rifle and his revolvers, and he looked at both of them standing armed in the kitchen, and something moved through his expression that was not surprise and not quite relief. Dub's at the barn, he said. Perkins is at the north timberline. Perkins knows to hold and not engage first, Evelyn said. He knows. Cole. She waited. They're going to come in hard. They're going to think numbers are enough. They usually are, he said. Not with the funnel. Not if they come through the gap the way we set it. He looked at her. You're sure about the gap? No, she said honestly. I'm not sure about anything. But I built the logic carefully, and I'd rather trust careful logic than luck. He held her gaze. All right. What happened in the next hour was not clean. Clean battles existed in the stories men told about them afterward, the neat narrative versions that had beginnings and middles and ends that arrived in order. What actually happened was compressed and loud and full of the specific chaos of things going wrong in manageable ways and things going right in unexpected ones. They came from 3 directions, as she'd expected. She watched from the east window and she counted 7. Not 8, not 10. 7, which meant either crews had kept more back than Cole expected, or there were men she wasn't seeing. She said that to Cole. I count 7, she said. There are more. He looked past her at the yard. Where? She scanned, thought about it. South Road. He's covering the retreat route. Making sure we can't run and making sure his people can fall back? How many? 1, maybe 2. Then the 7 are what we deal with. The gap to the west worked. She felt something complicated when it worked. Not pride exactly, more the specific satisfaction of a calculation proven correct, which was its own kind of feeling. The timber fence 60 yards in caught the first 4 men coming through the gap and directed them north toward the open ground between the gap and the barn, which was exactly where she'd wanted them. The north timber line was Cole's territory, and she heard it before she saw it. The crack of a rifle from the hillside, Perkins Station, and one of the men crossing the yard went down, not dead, hit in the leg, and the other three scattered in the way that men scatter when they realize the ground beneath them is organized against them. The creek approach was two men, as she'd said. Dub handled the creek approach in a way that produced two sounds and then silence, and she decided not to ask him the details. The three men who'd scattered from the gap were the problem. They regrouped near the barn. She could see them through the east window, using the barn wall as cover, working out that the angle of fire from the house didn't reach them there. One of them was doing the thinking, and she could see him looking at the house and calculating, and what he was calculating was a run across the yard to the kitchen door. Cole was at the west window. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. "Barn wall," she said. "3 men. They're going to run the door." "I can't reach them from the west window." "I know." She looked at the kitchen door, then at the east window, then at the kitchen door again. "The east window gives me an angle." He looked at her with that specific expression, the one where he was assessing quickly and didn't like all of what he was assessing. "You've shot at a man before?" he said. "No," she said, "but I've shot at things I needed to stop." He held her gaze for 1 second. "Low shot. You're not trying to kill, you're trying to stop the run." "I know." She went to the east window. She opened it 3 inches. The cold came in with violence. She could see the 3 men against the barn wall, and she could see the one doing the thinking, and she could see the moment he made his decision because his body changed, the particular tension before movement, and she put the rifle to her shoulder and she breathed out and she fired. She hit the fence post 6 inches to his left. He stopped. Everybody stopped. The silence after a shot is a specific kind of silence. She used it. "You're standing in a funnel," she called out, her voice clear and level, surprising even herself. "The timber to the north, the gap to the west. We've been building this for 2 weeks. You can keep trying to cross this yard or you can make a smarter decision." Nobody moved. "The man who's been doing your thinking is the one I just missed on purpose," she said. "I can adjust." A long moment. Nell was against the kitchen wall with the shotgun. Cole was very still at the west window. The man against the barn wall said, loudly, to no one in particular, "She's not wrong about the funnel." And something in that sentence, the recognition of it, the flat acknowledgement, shifted the moment. They didn't run. They didn't lay down weapons, not immediately, not until Cole came around the south side of the house with his rifle and his particular quality of immovable purpose. And Dub came up from the creek with blood on his coat that turned out not to be his. And Perkins came down from the timber with an expression on his face that she recognized. The face of a person who had done something irreversible and was still absorbing what that meant. It took another hour before it was fully settled. Men disarmed, the 2 from the south road accounted for. One had run, one had not. The injured man from the yard seen to with the same practical efficiency that Nell applied to everything. The man who'd been doing the thinking gave his name as Rourke and said very little after that, which Cole seemed to respect, or at least not to push against. She sat down on the porch steps when it was done because her legs had made a decision independent of her intentions. Cole came and stood at the bottom of the steps. He had a cut on his hand that he hadn't mentioned and was not mentioning now. "Your hand," she said. "Barn door, stupid." "Barn door or someone's boot?" He looked at her. "Someone's boot," she said. "Barn door," he said, but the corner of his mouth moved. She looked at the yard, which was not clean and would take time to put back to rights, and at the gap to the west where her fence had done its work, and at the timber line on the north where Perkins was still coming down the hill looking like he needed someone to hand him something ordinary to do. "It worked," she said, not triumphant, just taking the measurement. "It worked," Cole said. She was quiet. Then, "Cruz is going to find out." "Yes." "This doesn't end it." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She put her hands on her knees and pushed herself up and stood. "Then we need to think about what comes next," she said. Cole looked at her. That same look. The one she was starting to recognize as the look of a man who had spent a long time not expecting anything from anyone and was in the process of revising that expectation. "Yeah," he said. "We do." The yard took 2 days to put back to rights. That was something nobody mentioned in the stories people told about confrontations like this one, the aftermath, which was not dramatic and did not resolve cleanly and involved a great deal of physical labor. Fence posts that had been used as cover needed resetting. The barn door that Cole claimed had cut his hand, and that she had stopped questioning because she understood now that some things he would admit to and some things he wouldn't, and the category was fixed, had a hinge pulled half out of the wood and required an afternoon with tools. The creek crossing she and Perkins had repositioned needed to be checked because the fighting near it had disturbed the rock placement. She did the physical work because she needed something to put her hands to. It was the same instinct that had sent her to the account books on her first full day at the ranch. When her mind was processing something large and unresolved, her hands required occupation. What her mind was processing was Garrett Cruz. Rourke, the man who'd been doing the thinking against the barn wall, had said very little during the hour after the fighting ended. But when Cole had made it clear he wasn't interested in holding prisoners and didn't have the means to transport them to any authority that would do anything useful, a cold assessment she'd watched him make and had not argued with because it was correct, Rourke had said one thing before he left. He'd looked at Cole and said, "Cruz isn't going to send men next time." Cole had said, "What's he going to send?" And Rourke had looked at the ground and said, "Paper." She'd been standing 10 feet away when this happened, and she'd watched Cole's face do something she hadn't seen it do before. A very brief, very controlled expression of something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. A man recognizing a threat that his rifle could not address. Paper meant law, or the thing that passed for law in a territory where law was still being invented, and the men doing the inventing often had prior relationships with men like Cruz. She'd been thinking about nothing else for 2 days. She was resetting a fence post on the western line when Cole appeared in the gap, carrying 2 cups of coffee, which was such an uncharacteristic gesture that she stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Nell made me bring it," he said. "Nell told you to bring me coffee." "She told me to bring you coffee and talk to you, and she said it in the tone that means she's right, and I should not require a second explanation." Evelyn took the coffee. She sat on the fence rail. He stood beside her, and they looked at the gap, at the timber fence 60 yards in that had done its job, and drank their coffee. "Paper," she said. "Paper," he agreed. "Explain what that means in this territory specifically." He was quiet for a moment. "Cruz has a lawyer in Billings, a man named Aldous Prentice. Prentice has relationships with 2 territorial judges, which in practical terms means he can file claims that have the weight of law before anyone has time to challenge them." "What kind of claims?" "Land, mostly. If Prentice files a competing claim on a piece of property, says there's a prior deed, a surveying error, an unpaid debt, it ties up the land in legal proceedings for months, sometimes years. And while it's tied up, Cruz moves in and the owner either settles cheap or loses everything waiting for a judgment that may never come fairly." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "He's going to file a claim on the ranch." "Probably already has. That's what Rourke was telling me. It's already in motion." "On what grounds?" "Doesn't need strong grounds. Just needs paper filed before I can respond." He looked at the timber fence. "The fighting yesterday. That was the distraction. Keep me looking at armed men while Prentice files in Billings." She was quiet, thinking fast. "How long do you have once a claim is filed before you have to respond?" "In this territory, 30 days. In practice, however long it takes for the paperwork to reach you, which Prentice can slow down considerably." "Do you have your original deed?" "Yes." "Where?" "Box in the main room. Same box with the account ledgers." She handed him back the coffee cup and got off the fence rail. "I need to see it today." He followed her back toward the house without comment, which she appreciated. There were men who would have questioned why she needed to see it, who would have inserted themselves between her and the information, who would have managed the access. Cole just walked. The deed was in the box, underneath the ledgers, in an envelope that had been opened and refolded so many times the paper was soft at the creases. She spread it on the kitchen table and read it carefully. Cole stood across from her and watched her read. "This is a clean deed," she said. "I know." "Recorded in Billings?" "When I bought the land, yes." "Who was the recording clerk?" "Man named Huffer, I think." August Huffer. Is he still there? I don't know. She folded the deed carefully along its existing creases and put it back in the envelope. If Prentice has filed a competing claim, there will be a record at the same office where your deed is recorded. The filing dates matter. If your deed was recorded before any claim Prentice files, the claim is weak. But Prentice has influence in that office. Is Hoffer still there or not? I genuinely don't know. She thought. Then she thought differently, which was what she did when the first direction of thinking hit a wall. Is there anyone in Billings who would know the current state of your deed without tipping off Prentice that you're asking? Cole was quiet. She could see him going through the inventory of people he trusted, which from what she could observe was a short list. There's a woman, he said, Margaret Toll. She runs a boarding house on the east side of Billings. She's been in this territory longer than most, and she knows everyone's business without appearing to. Can you get word to her without it being obvious? If I send Perkins with a supply run to Billings, Perkins went to Millhaven 3 days ago. Sending him to Billings this soon looks like reconnaissance. Then I go. You going to Billings right now after yesterday is the most visible thing you can do. He looked at her. She could see the thing he didn't want to say assembling itself on his face. Nell? She said. Nell is not young. Nell is 61 years old. She's been in this territory longer than you've owned this ranch, and she has a shotgun under her bed that she didn't mention to anyone for 11 years. She paused. She can make a supply run to Billings without anyone thinking twice about an older woman going to town, and she knows Margaret Toll. I'd bet on it. Cole's expression did the thing it did when he was conceding a point. A slight compression, a brief stillness. She knows Margaret Toll, he confirmed. They've known each other for years. Then Nell goes to Billings. Today if she can, tomorrow morning at latest. He was quiet. I don't like sending her. She doesn't need you to like it. She needs you to ask her. And if Cruz has men watching the road, a woman on a supply run to Billings in October is not a target. She's furniture to men like Cruz. That's what we use. It came out more plainly than she intended, and she heard it land and saw the look on Cole's face at the specific bitterness in her tone. Sorry, she said. Don't, he said, and the word was quiet and meant the same thing hers had meant on the night she'd told him not to say things that were supposed to make her feel better. She nodded. Nell agreed without discussion in the way she agreed to most things, by immediately beginning to prepare for them, which was its own form of consent. She had a list of legitimate supplies written out before Evelyn finished explaining the situation, and she added Margaret Toll's name to a separate piece of paper that she folded and put in her coat pocket. Prentice files in the land office on Prospect Street, Nell said, pulling on her coat. I know where it is. I know a woman who works there. Not the clerk, but she does the filing. She'll talk to me. Cole said, Nell? Cole, Nell said, in the tone that meant the conversation was complete. He stopped. She left before noon. The 2 days of waiting were the hardest, not the 2 days after the fighting, which had been full of physical work and the specific focus of immediate problems. These 2 days were empty of occupation in the way that mattered. The forward thinking, the planning, the problem around the problem. Because they couldn't plan against Prentice's paper until they knew what the paper said. They were waiting for information, and there was nothing to do but wait. She cooked. She went through the accounts again. She rode the fence lines with Dub, who was a man who could spend 3 hours on horseback without saying 8 words, and who she found, for that reason, easier company than most. On the second afternoon, she found herself sitting on the porch in the cold watching the South Road, which was what she'd been doing more frequently, and she heard the door open behind her and felt the particular quality of presence that was Cole and not anyone else. He sat on the top step, not beside her, 1 step below, turned partly sideways, which was about as close as he usually positioned himself, and she had learned to read the precise geography of where Cole Maverick put himself in a space as its own form of communication. You were a bookkeeper, he said, before. Among other things. What else? She looked at the road. My father had a dry goods store. I worked the store, kept his accounts, helped my mother run the house. After he died, I was 20, I took work as a bookkeeper for 2 different businesses in our town. Then my mother passed. Then Clara had the idea to go west. She paused. So I was a bookkeeper, and then I was a woman on a wagon train, and now I'm here. You left out the part where you redesigned a ranch's defensive perimeter and called your shot against a man with a rifle in the dark. I didn't call my shot. I missed to the left on purpose. That's calling your shot. She almost smiled. I was terrified, she said, in case you thought otherwise. I know you were. You can't know that. I didn't show it. You were controlling your breathing, he said, at the east window before you fired. You were doing it deliberately. People only do that deliberately when they're scared enough that they have to. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the road. You notice a lot, she said. Occupational habit. From the bounty work. From survival in general. She turned back to the road. I was terrified every day for 11 days, she said. Not all day, but every day there was a part of it, and I was terrified at the auction, and terrified when I followed you out of town, and terrified the first night here. She said this plainly, an accounting. But I've noticed that terrified doesn't actually stop me from doing things. It just makes them louder on the inside. He was quiet for a moment. My first engagement in the army, he said, I threw up before it started. He said it the same way she'd said her thing, flat and factual, not performing vulnerability, just reporting. Then I did my job. After, I threw up again. Did it get better? Some. You get better at managing it. The thing itself doesn't go away. She thought about that. That's the most honest thing anyone has ever told me about fear. Most people lie about it. Most people think fear means weakness. Most people are wrong about that, he said. They sat in the cold. The mountain light in the late afternoon did something specific to the valley, turning everything briefly amber before the gray took back over, and she sat with it. Coal, she said. Yeah. What happens if Prentice's claim is already filed and it's backed by the two judges? Legally, what are our options? He thought. We could contest it. Takes money, takes time. In the meantime, the claim creates enough uncertainty that any bank loan I need for winter supplies becomes complicated. He stopped. Or we could find something that makes the claim not worth pursuing. What kind of something? If Crew's operation was documented, what he's been doing, the moving people, the auctions, who's connected to it? He paused. Prentice doesn't want that documented. She turned to look at him fully. You want to go after the operation itself. If the operation is exposed, Prentice withdraws. Cruz deals with his own problems. The land claim disappears because nobody wants their name attached to a public filing in a case that draws attention to what they've been doing. How do you document an operation like Cruz? Carefully. That's not an answer. Rourke, he said. She was quiet. Rourke's a practical man, Cole said. He did the math in the yard yesterday. He saw the funnel, he assessed the situation, he told his people to stop. That's a man who makes rational calculations. You want to talk to Rourke? I want to talk to Rourke, he confirmed. He knows where Crew's records are kept. Every operation like this has records. Who was moved, who paid, who knew. Cruz keeps them because the records are leverage against the people connected to him, including Prentice. If we get those records, we don't need to contest the land claim. The land claim goes away on its own. She sat with the shape of that. It was complicated and it required things she didn't know yet, and there were at least 4 places it could go wrong in ways she couldn't fully anticipate, and she turned all of that over and examined it. Where's Rourke now, she said. That's the question. Nell came back the following evening just before dark, with the supply wagon full and her expression carrying the specific weight of a woman who had found what she went looking for and some things she hadn't expected besides. She waited until she'd had food and coffee and had divested herself of coat and boots, because Nell did things in the order she did them, and there was no accelerating it. Cole and Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and waited. Prentice filed a competing deed claim 4 days ago, Nell said finally. Backdated survey error, claims the original boundary was miscalculated and that a portion of the north pasture was never legally included in Cole's purchase. The north pasture, Cole said. The north pasture, the timberline, and the creek, which is to say, the 3 approaches to this ranch. Nell looked at Evelyn. That's not coincidence. No, Evelyn said. That's Cruz telling us he understands what we built. Is Hoffer still the recording clerk? Cole asked. Hoffer retired. New clerk is a man named Vassy. Nell paused. Vassy is Prentice's cousin. The kitchen was quiet. Of course he is, Perkins said from his seat in the corner, which was the first thing he'd said since Nell came back. Margaret Toll, Evelyn said. What does she know about Rourke? Cole looked at her. I've been thinking about Rourke since before you suggested him, she said. Did Margaret know where he is? Margaret, Nell said slowly, knows quite a lot. Rourke has been in this territory for 8 years. He worked for 2 other operations before Cruz. He has a sister in a town called Flat Creek, 20 miles east. A sister, Cole said. Margaret said Rourke is the kind of man who sends money home, regularly, and that the last postal record she was aware of went to Flat Creek 2 weeks ago. Cole looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. You can't go to Flat Creek, she said. Not right now. No, he agreed. It has to be someone Rourke doesn't already know. The silence that followed was not comfortable. I'll go, Perkins said from his corner. Perkins, Cole started. I'm 26 years old and I have a face that people don't remember 10 minutes after they've seen it, Perkins said with no self-pity, just the same flat factual register that seemed to be catching from somewhere. Rourke's never seen me. I just need to know what to say. Evelyn looked at Perkins with a revised assessment of him. You'd need a reason to be in Flat Creek, she said. Something that holds up. I have a cousin in Flat Creek, Perkins said. A pause. Do you actually? Cole said. Yes, Perkins said. I genuinely do. I can visit my cousin and also talk to a man who might know where someone keeps important papers. Those things can both happen in the same trip. Evelyn looked at Cole. Cole looked at Evelyn. Tell him what Rourke needs to hear, she said. She spent the next hour with Perkins at the kitchen table, working out what he would say and how he would say it, and what questions he could not answer, and what to do when those questions came up. Perkins was a better listener than she'd expected. He wrote nothing down, because writing things down could be found, but he repeated things back accurately, and he asked good questions. When they were done, Cole walked Perkins out to the barn to sort out the horse and supplies for the morning, and Evelyn sat in the kitchen with Nell. You think it'll work? Nell said. Not a question. I think it might, Evelyn said, which is the most honest answer I can give. Most people want more certainty than that. Most people are asking the wrong question. She looked at the lamp. The question isn't whether it'll work. The question is whether not trying it is better. And it isn't. Nell was quiet for a moment. Then, you've changed since you got here. Evelyn looked at her. It's been less than 3 weeks. I know, still true. Nell picked up her cup. When you came off that road with Cole, you were gathered in. Every part of you pulled to the center like something bracing. I was bracing. You're still careful, Nell said, but you're not braced anymore. You're forward. She took a drink of her coffee. It looks better on you. Evelyn didn't say anything for a moment. Don't tell me what it looks like, she said finally, but her voice had lost the edge. Nell smiled. I'll tell you what I want. I've earned it. Cole came back in from the barn and looked at the two of them and said, What? Nothing, they said, at approximately the same time. He looked from one to the other with the expression of a man who understood he was outside a conversation and was making the rational decision not to pursue it. He poured himself coffee and sat down. Perkins leaves at first light, he said. 3 days to Flat Creek and back. 2.5 if the weather holds, Evelyn said. Weather's not going to hold. She looked at the window, at the darkness outside with its particular weight. No, she said. Probably not. They sat in the kitchen, the 3 of them, while the Montana night pressed in around the ranch house, and outside the fence line she'd helped build held their shape in the dark. And the creek ran where she'd redirected it, and the timber on the north hillside was quiet. And somewhere 20 miles east, a man named Rourke was about to be found by a young ranch hand with an unmemorable face and a cousin in Flat Creek, and whether that would be enough was something none of them could calculate yet with any confidence. What they could do was sit in the kitchen and be honest about that, which was not nothing. It was, in fact, almost everything. Perkins came back in 2.5 days, exactly as she'd estimated, arriving at dusk on the second day with snow on his coat and a look on his face that she had learned to read as the look of a man carrying more than he started with. He didn't say anything until he'd unsaddled his horse and come inside and accepted coffee from Nell and sat down at the kitchen table. Cole was there. Dub had come in from the fence line when he saw Perkins ride in, which was Dub's version of showing that he cared, and was standing near the door with his hat in his hands. Rourke was there, Perkins said. The kitchen was quiet. At his sister's? At his sister's. He'd been there 4 days. Perkins wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. He knew I was coming, or he knew someone was coming. He said Cruz sent word that Cole Maverick had gotten Rourke's location from one of the other men. He was waiting to see which direction the trouble came from. What direction did he decide we were? Evelyn said. Perkins looked at her. I told him what you said, that we weren't interested in Rourke specifically, that we were interested in the records, and that if he helped us find them, whatever arrangement he had with Cruz was his own business, and we'd say nothing about it to anyone. How long did it take him to decide? About 10 minutes. He asked me 3 questions. What questions? Cole said. Whether Cole Maverick was the kind of man who kept his word. Whether you... Perkins looked at Evelyn. Were the woman from the auction, and whether Prentice had already filed the land claim. What did you tell him? Yes to all 3, she nodded. And? Perkins reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper, which he put on the table in front of Cole. Rourke wrote down where the records are kept. He said Cruz uses a lawyer's office in a town called Denton, 30 miles north of Billings. Not Prentice, a different man, one who doesn't know what he's holding. Cruz told him it was business correspondence. The records are in a locked box in the back file room. He paused. Rourke said the box has a brass latch and a lock that a decent penknife can open in about 30 seconds because Cruz is careful about a lot of things and careless about a few. Cole unfolded the paper and read it. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, the specific realignment of a man receiving information that changes the shape of a problem he's been carrying. Denton, he said. 30 miles north of Billings, Perkins repeated. I know where Denton is. Evelyn looked at the paper over Cole's arm. An address, a description of the building, a name, the lawyer's name, she assumed, and a small rough sketch of the interior layout with an X marking the file room. Rourke drew this from memory, she said. He said he'd been in the office twice, Perkins said. He remembers things. So does Cruz, Cole said. He'll know Rourke talked. Rourke said to tell you he's aware of that and that it's his problem to manage and not yours. Cole folded the paper and held it. He looked at the table and she could see him doing what he always did, the comprehensive quiet assessment, taking inventory of everything in the space, including the space itself. I have to go to Denton, he said. We've been over this, she said. You going anywhere right now? I know the risks. Then you know that if Cruz is watching this ranch, which he is, and he sees you ride north toward Billings, he will know immediately what you're doing. What's the alternative? Send Perkins back out? No, she said. Send me. The kitchen was very quiet. Dub looked at the ceiling. Perkins looked at his coffee. Nell looked at Evelyn with an expression that contained both concern and something that might have been admiration, held in careful balance. Cole looked at her with the expression of a man managing a response that his first instinct and his actual judgment were arguing about. Evelyn, think about it practically, she said, because she knew him well enough now to know that practically was the way through, that appealing to his protectiveness would produce the opposite of what she needed. A woman traveling to Billings in October is not suspicious. A woman going to a lawyer's office to inquire about a land matter, her own land matter, because I can say I'm looking for information about a property claim which is entirely true, is completely unremarkable. I walk in, I find the file room, I get the box open. You've never done anything like that. I've never done most of what I've done in the last 3 weeks, she said. That hasn't been the criterion. He looked at her for a long moment. The lawyer's name, she said. What is it? He looked at the paper. Beaumont, James Beaumont. I'll tell him I'm inquiring about a property dispute in the valley south of Billings, and I need to understand the filing process. That gives me a reason to be there, a reason to be in the office for an extended period while he talks. and a reason to ask to use his necessary room, which in most offices of that kind is through the back hall past the file room. Another silence. How do you know where the necessary room usually is? Perkins asked. I worked in 2 lawyers' offices in Ohio, she said. The file room and the necessary room are always in the back. The file room is on the left, and the necessary is on the right in every single office I've ever been in, because lawyers are a profession that builds the same room in the same way everywhere they go. Dub made the sound that meant he was conceding a point. Cole put the paper on the table. He pressed his hand flat on it. He looked at his hand. I'll ride with you to Denton, he said. Not into town, but to Denton. Cole, that's not negotiable, he said, and the quiet in his voice was the genuine kind, the kind that had nothing performative in it, and she recognized it for what it was. Not control, not possession, but the specific fear of a person who had already lost people they couldn't protect and was not willing to add her to that list without at least being close enough to matter. She looked at him. All right, she said. They left the next morning before dawn, in the first hard snow of the season, which was either terrible timing or the best possible cover, and she had decided to treat it as the latter. Cole rode, and she drove the small wagon Nell had loaded with enough to justify the trip. Bolts of cloth, a list for the general store and billings, the shape of ordinary commerce. They didn't talk much on the ride. The snow was light but steady, and the road required attention, and there was something between them that didn't need conversation to occupy it. She had noticed that about Cole, that his silences were inhabited, that he was present in them in a way that many people were not present even when they were talking. About 5 miles from Denton, he pulled up, and she stopped the wagon. I'll wait at the livery on the eastern edge of town, he said. If you're not back at the livery in 2 hours, I'll be back in less than 2 hours. If you're not, he said. She looked at him, snow on his hat, on his shoulders, on the dark coat she'd watched Nell repair the shoulder of what felt like a longer time ago than it had been. He was looking at her with something that he had been working up to saying for some time, she could tell, and she waited. I need you to know, he said, what you've done here, who you are. I knew some of it from the auction platform, and I understood the rest of it in the 11 days after, but He stopped. He was a man who chose words carefully and was now in territory where careful word choice was harder than usual. I don't want you to think that any of it, the $500, the room, the work, I don't want you to think that was me deciding something about you. It was me making a decision about myself. She looked at him for a long moment. I know that, she said. I'm not sure you do. Cole, she said, I have been watching you very carefully for 3 weeks. I know exactly what kind of man you are. She paused. I'm still figuring out what I think about it. He looked at her. That's the most honest thing I can tell you right now, she said. He nodded once, slowly. That's enough, he said, and meant it. She clicked to the horses and drove into Denton. The office of James Beaumont, Esquire, was on the main street, a narrow 2-story building with a painted sign that needed repainting and a front room that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. Beaumont himself was a small man in his 50s, with the preoccupied expression of someone whose mind was always slightly ahead of the conversation he was currently in. She had met men like this in Ohio. She knew how to talk to them. She talked about her property dispute for 22 minutes. She was specific enough to be credible and vague enough to require clarification, which kept Beaumont talking and gave her time to observe the layout. The file room was behind and to the left of Beaumont's desk, through a half-open door. The necessary room, she noted, was through the back hall to the right, exactly as she'd said. She excused herself to use the necessary room. The hall was empty. The file room door was not locked. There was a latch, but it was the simple kind that existed for privacy, not security. She was inside in 4 seconds. Brass latch, locked box, exactly as Rourke had described. She had a penknife in her coat pocket. 30 seconds was optimistic. It took her closer to 50, because her hands were cold from the ride and the lock had a specific tension to it that required adjustment. But it opened. The documents inside were not voluminous. Cruz was careful, but what was there was enough. Transaction records, names, dates, amounts. Holt's name appeared in 14 entries. Prentice's name appeared in 3, which was 3 more than a lawyer's name, should appear in a document like this. 2 territorial officials she didn't recognize by name but whose titles were clear. She could not take the documents. Taking them would tell Cruz immediately that someone had found the box, and Cruz knowing would eliminate any advantage before they could use it. She had thought about this on the ride. She had a good memory. She had always had a good memory. Her father's gift, the spatial recall that stored things as pictures rather than sequences. She read each page with the focus she brought to accounts, the part of her mind that photographed rather than merely looked. And she read until she had what she needed and put everything back in the order she found it and closed the box and applied the lock and was back in the hall in under 6 minutes. She returned to Beaumont's office and thanked him for his time and told him she'd think about retaining his services, which was not a lie because she had indeed thought about it for approximately 1 second before deciding against it. She drove the wagon to the livery on the eastern edge of town. Cole was there in 4 minutes. He looked at her face and said nothing. He read faces the way she read accounts, for the information in them rather than the performance. "I got what we need," she said. He nodded once. He mounted up. They left Denton with the snow behind them, heading south, and she began telling him what she'd read, reciting it from the photograph her memory had made, and he listened without interrupting, and by the time they were 3 miles from the ranch, she had given him everything. He was quiet for almost a full mile after she finished. "Prentice," he said, 3 entries, 1 from before the land claim, 2 after. The 2 after prove he knew what he was filing was connected to Cruz's operation. Yes, and the 2 territorial officials, Harmond and Crease, Cole said, from what she'd given him. If those names are known in Billings, that's enough to make anyone connected to this land claim very motivated to withdraw it. "They're known," Cole said, with a flatness that suggested he knew them personally, and the knowledge was not pleasant. "Then we write it down," she said. "Everything I saw, in my handwriting, sworn as a record. We make 3 copies. 1 goes to a territorial newspaper in Helena, not Billings, Helena, which is far enough from Prentice's influence to be safer. 1 goes to the territorial governor's office. 1 we keep. You're going to make a written record of documents you read in someone else's file room. I'm going to make a written record of what I observed during a legitimate visit to a legal office," she said. "I didn't take anything. I didn't damage anything. I read documents that were not locked against reasonable access." The box was locked. "The box opened when I touched it," she said, and held his gaze. He looked at her for a long moment, and the corner of his mouth moved. "You're going to be all right," he said, and the way he said it was not a comfort offered to someone fragile. It was the observation of someone recognizing a quality in another person that deserved to be named. "I know," she said. They got back to the ranch as the afternoon light was failing. She sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours with paper and pen and wrote it all out. Everything she'd read, organized not as a list but as a narrative, because narratives were harder to dismiss than lists, because they made a reader follow a sequence and understand not just the facts, but the shape the facts made together. She wrote 3 copies by hand, and her wrist ached by the end, and she didn't stop. Nell read the first copy when she was done. Nell read slowly and carefully. And when she finished, she put it down and said, "This is enough." "I think so too," Evelyn said. Cole sent the copies. Helena first, by the fastest route Perkins could manage, which meant Perkins riding hard for 2 days. The governor's office by post, which was slower but created a paper record of the sending, and they waited. Waiting was something she was getting better at, not because she'd become more patient, but because she'd learned that waiting was its own form of action when you'd done everything else correctly. You didn't wait instead of acting. You waited after acting, while the actions you'd already taken worked their way through the world. Prentice withdrew the land claim 19 days later. There was no announcement, no letter of explanation, no acknowledgement that it had ever been filed. It simply ceased to exist in the territorial record, withdrawn on a Tuesday morning in November with the bureaucratic quietness of something erased before it could become permanent. Vassy, the recording clerk who was Prentice's cousin, was replaced the following week by a woman named Ruth Canfield, who had no relationship to anyone of consequence and who filed things in the order they were brought to her without favor or delay. Cole told Evelyn about the withdrawal on a Wednesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp between them and snow against the windows again. The real snow now, the kind that meant winter had stopped threatening and started arriving. She sat with it for a moment. "Cruz?" she said. Word came from Margaret Toll that Harmon resigned from his territorial post. "Crease is under inquiry." He paused. "Cruz has gone quiet." "Not gone. Men like Cruz don't leave. But quiet." "Holt?" "Holt is the most interesting part." He said this with the tone of someone about to say something he'd been deciding whether to say. "Holt came to Red Hollow last week. Apparently made a number of visits to the families of several women who'd been through his operation over the last 3 years. Returned some money, nothing like what he owed, but something." She looked at her hands. "That's not justice," she said. "No," Cole agreed. "The women he sold, they don't get anything real back from Holt leaving money on a doorstep." "No," he said again. "They don't." She was quiet, feeling the weight of that, which was important to feel and not resolve too quickly. There was a version of this story where the bad men were fully punished and everything balanced, and she had learned enough in the last several weeks to know that version was not available in this territory or any other. What was available was partial and imperfect and carried the specific texture of actual outcomes rather than deserved ones. "Is it enough?" she said. "It's what there is," Cole said. She nodded. It was not satisfaction. It was something more honest than satisfaction. The recognition that you could do good work and reach the limit of what was reachable, and that the limit being frustrating didn't mean the work had been wrong. She thought about Clara. She thought about her mother and father. She thought about 11 days on the cold ground and the crooked plank of an auction platform and the rope around her wrists and the specific sound of Cole Maverick's voice saying $500 into a crowd that had gone suddenly, comprehensively quiet. She thought about all the women before her who had stood on platforms in other towns and other territories and had not had a stranger walk out of a crowd. "There are others," she said. Cole looked at her. "Women still in Cruz operation, or Holt's, or men we don't know the names of." She looked at the table. "The records I read, there were names. Women's names with dates and locations. Some of those dates were recent. Evelyn, I'm not proposing something reckless," she said. "I'm thinking out loud." "Think out loud, then." "The records exist. I read them. What I wrote down is in Helena and in the governor's office. If someone with authority follows the thread, there are women who could be found." She paused. "Margaret Toll. She knows everyone's business, you said. She's been in the territory longer than most." "Margaret is 63 years old. Margaret runs a boarding house that is known to every traveling person in this part of Montana. She has more information about where people are and where they've been than any official record." She looked at him. "I'd like to meet her." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "All right," he said. The winter was hard, as Montana winters were hard, with the specific indifference of cold and snow that didn't care about plans or timelines or the difficulties of the people who had to move through them. Perkins broke 2 fingers in November doing something with a fence he declined to fully explain. Dub developed a cough that Nell managed with an iron determination that brooked no argument from either Dub or the illness itself. The cattle in the north pasture required moving twice when the creek froze in a pattern that made their access to the unfrozen portion impossible. She did all of it. Not alone. She was never alone on the ranch now. She was part of the working fabric of it, and that was different from being alone in the way that mattered. But she did her portion without complaint, and more than her portion when more was needed, because the ranch required it, and she understood the ranch now in the way that only comes from having worked a piece of land through difficulty. She met Margaret Toll in December, when Cole took the wagon to Billings for winter supplies, and she came with him. Margaret was a woman of 63 with white hair and extremely direct eyes, and a boarding house that smelled of wood smoke, and something baking that Evelyn couldn't identify, but that made the place feel like a specific antidote to all outdoor weather. Margaret looked at her for a long moment after Cole made the introduction. "You're the one who read Beaumont's file room," Margaret said. "I don't know what you mean," Evelyn said. Margaret smiled. A real one, the kind that had decades of experience behind it. "No," she said. "Of course you don't." She gestured to a chair. Sit down. There are some things I want to tell you." What Margaret told her over the next 2 hours was detailed and practical and included the names and approximate locations of 7 women she had reason to believe were still in dangerous situations across the territory. She told her this the way she told everything, as information, as inventory, as the accounting of a woman who had been keeping records of a different kind for a very long time because someone had to, and she was the one who happened to be there. Evelyn listened the way she listened to accounts. She remembered all of it. On the ride back to the ranch, with the winter dark coming down and snow beginning again, Cole said, "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I know what I want to do. I'm working out what's possible." "Those are 2 different calculations." "Everything is 2 different calculations," she said. "What you want and what's reachable. You try to close the gap between them." He drove the wagon in silence for a while. The horses knew the road well enough that he could afford to not attend to it entirely. "I'm going to need help," she said. "Yes," he said. "Margaret, Nell. People I don't know yet who know things I don't know yet." "Yes," he said again. "And you," she said. He looked at her. The dark was coming on fully now, the mountains invisible against the sky, the road ahead lit only by the wagon lamp, a small yellow circle moving through the large Montana night. "Yes," he said. And that one carried everything the previous 2 had not, the complete weight of it, the full understanding of what yes meant and what it committed to and what it would cost and why he was saying it anyway. She looked at the road ahead. "I used to think," she said, "that belonging somewhere was something you were given, that you were born into it or married into it or assigned it by whatever circumstances put you in a place." She paused. "I've been thinking that's wrong." "What's right?" he said. "You build it," she said. "Out of the work you do and the people you do it with and the choices you make about what you're willing to stand for. It's not given. You construct it, piece by piece, and it's not finished. You're always adding to it or losing parts of it or shoring up sections that are going weak." She watched the lamplight move across the snow on the road. "It's more like maintenance than arrival." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not a comfortable way to think about it." "No," she said. "But it's honest." "You can work with honest," he said. "You can," she agreed. The ranch appeared at the end of the valley in the lamplight of the windows. Nell had left lights burning, which was the thing she always did. The specific small act of a woman who understood what it meant to approach a dark place versus a lit one. The barn was settled, the fence lines held, the creek ran under its shelf of ice. She looked at it and felt the things she'd been building toward feeling for 2 months. The things she hadn't let herself name while there was still fighting to be done, and paper to be countered, and records to be read in lawyers' file rooms. It felt like hers, not because anyone had given it to her, because she had put herself into it, had reshaped parts of it with her own hands, had defended it and accounted for it and thought about it in the problem around the problem way that was the most honest expression of caring she knew how to offer. She got down from the wagon before Cole had fully stopped it, which was not graceful, and she walked to the house with her boots in the snow, and she went through the door, and the warmth hit her, and Nell looked up from the stove and said, "Supper's on," in the tone that meant she'd been watching for the wagon and was glad to see it. "Nell," Evelyn said. "I have some things to tell you about what Margaret Toll said." Nell turned from the stove. She looked at Evelyn's face. She looked at it the way she'd looked at it 11 weeks ago, when a woman she didn't know had arrived at her kitchen with rope marks on her wrists and had sat down and immediately started identifying theft in the account books. "I'll put on more coffee," Nell said. Cole came through the door, stomping snow off his boots, and Perkins came in from the barn a few minutes later, and Dub appeared at the door with his hat in his hands, and they were all there in the kitchen in the lamplight. These improbable people who had found each other in this particular place at this particular time, none of them fitting neatly into any story about who was supposed to be where, all of them there anyway. The thing about survival, the thing Evelyn understood now that she had not understood standing on that crooked auction platform with her hands tied and her future being narrated by a man with a boot on her fingers, was that it was not the end of something. It was not the finish line. Survival was the beginning of the question of what you were going to do with the fact that you were still here. Some people answered that question by being very careful, by pulling close and protecting what they had and not reaching past the edge of what was safe. She understood that answer. She had seen what happened to people who reached too far and found nothing to hold, but she had also seen what happened when a stranger walked out of a crowd and made a different calculation. When a woman who'd been in a place 11 years picked up a shotgun nobody knew about. When a young man with an unmemorable face rode 2.5 days through snow to find a man named Rourke and say the right thing in the right way. She had seen what happened when people decided that someone else's situation was their problem too. It didn't always work. It hadn't worked for every woman in Margaret Toll's accounting. It wouldn't work for every woman she was going to try to reach. The territory was large and the forces in it were old and entrenched, and the gap between what she wanted and what was reachable was exactly as large as Cole had understood it to be when he'd agreed to help her anyway. But the gap could be closed. Piece by piece, calculation by calculation, woman by woman, the gap could be worked against. She sat down at the kitchen table in the lamplight with Nell and Cole and Perkins and Dub, and she told them what Margaret Toll had said, and they listened, and nobody said it was too much or too far or too dangerous. And the coffee got cold while they talked, and outside the Montana winter pressed against the walls of the house and found them, for now, holding. That was enough to start with. It had always been enough to start with. The rest was the work.